interesting framework to understand the current crisis, which is not merely a crisis of finance, but also a crisis of civilization in terms of understanding the current mode of regulation and also regime of accumulation of the current capitalism. He also introduced to us some of the alternatives that has been taking place in Latin America. So our next speaker is going to talk about European crisis. Professor Remy Herrera, he promised to introduce to us this morning the problem of the Eurozone crisis.
Thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, to the organizers, to Professor Tiejun, to Professor Laupinchi, all the team, for the welcome and for this useful and beautiful forum. And congratulations. So I told you this afternoon that my very poor English is one of my means to fight imperialism. Be sure that I fight imperialism even stronger this evening. So I will speak slowly, but poorly. How many minutes? Sorry. Is that channel? 20. Okay, perfect. So, one of the numerous worrying aspects of the current crisis hitting the Eurozone is related to the indebtedness of public authorities and particularly the states, who partially nationalized private debts. And this implied a lot of difficulties in public finances as regard social budgets especially. Hence, of course, this is a systemic crisis. This is much more than a financial one. It's not a traditional or standard credit or liquidity crisis. It's really a structural, systemic, extremely serious crisis. But one of the problem is the so-called sovereign debt crisis. Okay? Hence the restructuring, repurchasing, regrouping proposals which are currently discussed in Europe. But the seriousness of this crisis in Greece especially, but not only in Greece, in many other countries in the Eurozone, begs a question. Don't the peoples of Europe have something to learn from the experiences that some countries of the South have gone through and from their anti-crisis strategies they have adopted? Because up to now, it is in fact the North that has systematically provided its solutions or imposed its solutions to the South, solutions supposedly universally valid, but that in reality rarely fitted. Today, time seems to have changed. So I believe that it's a pertinent question. What lessons for Europe in crisis from the southern experiences? In this context of high uncertainty, the current crisis of the Eurozone should be seen as linked to the very foundations of the integration process in Europe. The European capitalists believed they could create a single currency without a state, nor even a solid political Europe. So the original error or failure was that Europe claimed it could make converge by force vastly different economies without reinforcing institutional the institutional framework, nor for sure, nor any social equalization. Thus, it's perfectly logical that this bad Europe, anti-social, anti-democratic, turned against the European peoples, is openly rejected today. Clearly, the neoliberal solution of widespread austerity programs imposed as an attempt to save the capitalism are inefficient, are absurd, are unacceptable, and they are the surest way to aggravate this crisis and to rush the system even more quickly towards the abyss, while encouraging politically everywhere in Europe the rise of the extreme right. So this is quite serious economically, but also politically. Yet it would be nourishing illusions to believe in the possibility of a new Keynesian compromise. Today, high finance that has retaken the power is unwilling to make any concession. So Keynesianism has no reality, no future in Europe. And it can only spread false hopes. Faced with the current crisis, systemic, multidimensional, and the change, the dangers and the illusions that brings, the time has come for the progressive forces in Europe to pass over to the offensive by formulating alternative proposals for a radical left, internationalist, oriented towards social program and at the same time towards the solidarity with the global south. Among the urgent discussions to engage in is getting out of the Eurozone, particularly for the southern Europe, under some conditions and in different ways depending on the country. Obviously, such a decision would be hard to bear for small countries, like Greece, for example. It would be a lie to say that this break could be done easily, but it would also be lying to say that such a path of breaking up would be doomed to disaster, and this for various reasons. First, some larger European economies are not in the Eurozone, such as Britain's, and it could even be said that this is partly from Britain that the chaos in the Eurozone is organized by the finance, okay? The Anglo-US finance, high finance. Secondly, countries that has been severely affected by the crisis are on the road to recovery outside the Eurozone, notably Iceland. And finally, outside the European continent, governments in the south dare to decide to break the rules of the existing international monetary system without causing chaos at home. On the contrary, it is precisely this strategy of breaking with the neoliberal dogma that allowed them to reinforce themselves and to recover, reclaiming more national sovereignty, including monetary. Not only, but including monetary. sovereignty. So, I'm thinking here, among many other examples, about, for example, the de-dollarization process in Cuba, or the distancing of Venezuela vis-à-vis the IMF, or the management of the public debt burden in Ecuador, for example, or about the creation of Bancosur around the countries of ALBA, including Bolivia and others from the Mercosur, like Brazil. But one can also think about the case of countries with less radical governments, such as Argentina, which declared itself insolvent in 2001 and whose economy has quickly returned to growth without it being isolated from world trade. It was exactly the contrary. They recover quickly, even for the export indicators. Okay? So, cessation of payments, currency devaluation, and a very special debt conversion plan imposed to the Germans, for example. Germany was against this plan, but Argentina imposed this plan to all the creditors. They were precisely the measure that saved the Argentine economy from neoliberal disaster. No doubt, getting out of the euro would be much more difficult for the smallest countries in Europe. For example, for Greece, which has a production and an export base much lower than that of Argentina, supported on agro-industry and energy. But this would certainly not be the end of the world, as mentioned by the dominant media. It will be extremely hard to make such a decision, in particular because of huge public account deficits and because of the risk of capital flights, but it now seems a necessary step to slip out of the neoliberal trap and to free up resources for social programs. It's very hard, but necessary. Above all, before Germany decides itself to exclude Greece from the Eurozone. Greece or Italy or Spain or Portugal or even France. So it's very important to take this decision before, in order to be on the offensive and not on the defensive. Because an exclusion of Greece from the Eurozone plus an ultra-liberal program of recovery would be the absolute catastrophe, the absolute disaster. Okay? So offensive and not defensive. But in all these, but it's possible to, and many other examples. In Malaysia, after the ASEAN crisis in 1997, for example, with a government which was not left at all, but they decided to impose restriction to the orders of the IMF and to decide what monetary policy applied. Even Malaysia did that. So, in all these southern experiments with their respective limitations, many limitations, sure. Bancosur is a very small thing, but it's very important, and it's the good way. So in all these experiments, the government's voluntary recovery of its decision-making policy regarding the economy allowed the country to dig its way out of the trap in which it was stuck. So why not in Europe? That's my question. Why not in Europe? Of course, the situations differ from one continent to another, but there are alternatives in the form of post-capitalist democratic social transition in solidarity with the South. The imperative is not to offer miracle or turnkey solution, but to reopen spaces of debate on the left. It is high time to speak without taboo or complexes of anti-crisis solutions to serve really the European peoples. That is to say, what? For example, a controlled departure from the Eurozone, okay, case by case, but with a simultaneous strategy doing that on the offensive. Decide to go out. Devaluation of the currency, urgent, of the national currency or of another, for example, new common currency. Why not? Okay? Exchange control, not only on financial flows. Redefining the political role of the central banks, because yesterday, they decided in the European Central Bank not to help